Life aboard this alien ship is, in one word, boring. At least that's the short answer. The long answer is excessively boring. Though we have free range of many areas, there isn't much here to do as far as recreation or entertainment. Sure, we can go to the chow hall, we can eat what passes for food here, and of course we can sleep because we all have our own quarters, even though those quarters are so damn small you might as well be in a closet. Most people try to converse, but there's only one place to talk, really sit down and talk, that is, and that's inside the chow hall, where there's actually seating. Everywhere else is just like hallways or corridors, whatever the hell you want to call it. I keep having to remind people, hey, don't stand in the way of those hatches, because if they close, you don't know if it's going to stop because you're in the way. If they close, they might just cut you in half. I could tell there's a few guys who were Navy men who really knew their stuff when it came to ships. They seemed to very quickly figure out ways to entertain themselves. Some of them made their own decks of cards, other people created chess sets, checkers, all sorts of different things. Somehow, a guy actually carved a six-sided die. I'm sure if he carved a second one, they'd be trying to gamble for something, shooting dice and all that, even though I have no idea how that works. However, he only got the one down, so whatever he was going to play with that. All in all, we did what we could. And it wasn't long before my watch ran out of juice, and I ended up just leaving it inside my own bag. I left it with any electronics I had. Most everybody's electronics ran out of power within the first couple of days, mainly because they tried to keep themselves occupied with any sort of games or music or whatever it might be. They didn't have any charge ports. No matter how many times we asked them for something to charge our electronics, they refused. These guys are assholes. But, well, at least we're still alive. We began to converse around, asking, what did they do to you? What did they do to this other person? And it all came down to the same thing. We were all cleansed in a way. A few of them said that all their blemishes were gone. I had them check my back, and where I couldn't see, they said, oh yeah, your body hair is gone too. Your moles are all gone, everything. I'm like, oh, wonderful. Apparently, a few of them actually had severe issues with viruses they had picked up along the way. And they said they never felt better. Apparently, whatever they did was enough to kill viruses. I guess out here in the vacuum of space, viruses are dangerous. I'm sure they would have ended all the bacteria in our system too if that wouldn't have just killed us. But we all still speculated what was going on. It wasn't until a few of us prior service guys really sat down and thought about it, what was going on. We didn't really know for a long time, not for several days. In fact, it was probably 2 weeks considering. But it was difficult, very difficult to figure out what day it was, as the lights stayed on 24/7, 365. Well, by human terms at least. It was difficult sleeping. We insisted that they let us turn the lights off in our room, and they agreed that we would be allowed to shut our lights off. This was annoying, to say the least, but thankfully, starlight in the blackness of space was something worth looking at, something that seemed almost comforting, in effect, as you tried to drift off to sleep every single time. We would wake up, of course, most of us having to run down to the bathroom because this new food was not settling well. But hey, alien cuisine was like eating MREs. The only difference is MREs would bind you up. This stuff gave you the runs. A few people ended up losing a lot of weight really quick. Thankfully, my body's gone through so much junk in its time, it can adapt pretty quick. The younger ones, me being older, I would say the younger ones, about 20, were the easiest ones to adapt to the newer surroundings. Although they did spend more time getting to know each other in the more personal matters. And of course, fights would break out over that sort of thing, and I'm sure we were being watched. I never really gave a crap, except for once when a young girl ran behind me, asking me to protect her. I remember looking at the guy, and he was very insistent that she talk to him. Yeah, dude, not a smart idea with somebody who's got my level of training, especially when he didn't have any. It's kind of funny. And as he was on the ground begging me to let go of his arms after demanding I do so, and I almost snapped his shoulder out of joint, that he finally backed off. Thankfully, this was the only incident I had, but apparently other folks were really starting to get into their combat skills as, well, let's face it, boredom will do that. However, what we ended up doing is trying to figure out a way to exercise, burn off some of this energy. We figured the food was high caloric for some reason, but we didn't figure out why. So eventually, the only place we could figure out a way to work out was the actual chow hall. We had to move some of the chairs and tables and all this other fun shit around, but we were able to set up an area where we could actually work out, help each other. Some of the guys there were really good, and they helped me on my balancing as my flexibility and everything had gone to hell in my life. So it was really nice to be able to be fixed up and be able to have similar strength as I felt like I was in my 20s. It was weird. I was starting to wonder what else they did to us. Maybe nanomachines, maybe, I don't know, some sort of organic whatever the hell. All I know is I felt really good, and a whole bunch of others did too. Eventually, this is where most of us spent our time, just simply exercising, doing laps around the chow hall, which got very, very boring, so of course people would talk while they're jogging, doing push-ups, handstands. We even were able to get a couple of pull-up bars set up. And this was seemingly pleasant to our captors. I don't know if what they were doing was a sense of a smile, but every time we were working out, they always seemed to be looking at us. And then they would talk to each other in that weird language, just low enough that we couldn't hear. However, what they didn't realize is that thing they put into our heads had started to adapt itself. I was starting to wonder if it was like that really bad sci-fi show back in the day where they put some sort of organic chip in their head. Maybe that's what's in ours, and it just took a while to integrate. Eventually, I didn't let on, but I could start to understand their language. And I'm no linguist. A few people could really figure it out quick because they are linguists. However, it was still strange that I was suddenly able to understand not only what they were saying, but I could read the strange glyphs that were all over. I could see the signs that said bridge this way, engineering that way, cantina, the latrine, or the head, whichever one you want to call it. They had a completely different word for it, the shenknacha. I'm thinking, is that the sound you make when you're in there trying to get rid of all this alien food, one way or another? Regardless of that, the one place we couldn't go was the two, was the bridge and engineering. No matter what, we couldn't get past the bulkheads. There was some sort of bioscanner, I think, because we could see our wonderful bridge crew and engineering crews just simply walk through, but every time we got close, those doors just slammed shut, and they seemed to lock. What actually annoyed them is if we were outside the doors, just sitting there talking, the doors wouldn't open, and we could actually hear them pounding on the doors. Maybe in an odd attempt to get us to go away, but I didn't really give a shit. Eventually, I sat there and watched, and I started getting quick looks on the inside, and so did others. Those of us who realized this might not be the pleasure cruise we thought it might be started conversing more and more about what we'd seen, and we started to compare notes. It was around this time, what we wager was about 2 weeks of traveling whatever they call their version of FTL, faster than a light travel. It didn't matter. We found ourselves going to a massive space station. And when I say massive, I'm not kidding. The thing was simply flippin' huge. The size of this ship had to be 4 or 5 times the size of Long Island. I would say almost maybe the length of Japan, something along those lines. And yet there were several of them. And we pulled into the space station. We were actually able to go inside, sort of. You see, the ship itself decided to turn sideways, We were all instructed to go to our rooms and wait until docking procedures were over. I figured, what the hell, this has just got to be a commonplace thing. But as soon as I got in that door, I actually heard the ka-tunk of a locking mechanism going into place. I tried to open the door. It would not open. I ended up having to sit there on the bed, and I waited as the ship turned, and here I am basically face to face with the station. We looked forward, and it seemed as though the station would open up with these massive doors and not fully encapsulate the ship, but simply open up enough where a third of the ship itself was inside, and then the doors locked on and seemed like they pressure sealed around it. I didn't see any type of force field, but we must have actually pushed through one because there were people, well, somethings, walking around in there, and a lot of them. You would think this was part of a major city or something with the amount of different species that were there. As I looked around, I couldn't help but notice that there was a whole bunch of humanoids, but absolutely no humans. At least not that I could see. There were different ones. There were some with big ears, some with horns, some with antennae, some with 5 fingers, some with 6, some with 3. Most of them very gangly and extremely thin, which was surprising. I wondered if that was just kind of a thing being in space, that you end up very, very thin. Maybe that's the reason why the food is the way it is. As we looked around, I noticed something beneath me, and my heart dropped down to my ass. There was a stage. However, the stage itself was not facing us. No one was about to address us. They were going to speak out to the crowd. It was very easy to see towards the bottom was set up similar to a theater with rows and rows and rows of seats, reaching up easily 5 times higher than a standard football stadium. It was incredible reaching out. But that only went about halfway up the ship. The rest was just different layers and layers of walkways that people were going to different shops and different areas for. We did not understand what was going on, and I looked out and I tried to push my face against the glass to look over to see, can I see any of my own folks? No, but why are we up against the glass? What the? Oh, crap. That's when I fully understood. As soon as I saw a vehicle hover up with 4 very large arms, this vehicle looked similar to a bug with the 4 arms reaching out from it. No wings moved. In place seemed to be several different motors. They seemed to be anti-gravity motors, but they were very close to the center of the ship. It reached out farther down the ship from me and latched onto the side, and then it pulled something out. It wasn't long before I realized exactly what the hell I was looking at. And what I was looking at was a compartment just like the one I was in, and they were bringing it down towards the stage. I listened as close as I could, but I couldn't hear much until I pushed my ear right up against the glass, and then I heard a booming voice come across their version of the PA system. "Greetings all, and welcome to the first auction for the humans. This is a newly discovered species, and this species has shown its ability to be not only fast, but also strong. They will make great laborers for you. However, we have also found that they will be great for your own personal protection and also your pleasure." With this, I cringed as I looked across the whole bunch of humanoid beasts that were now gathering in mass to see us. I could see a few looking closer and closer to us. I swear a few of them I could hear just cheering and laughing, pointing at different ones of us. "Now, if you'll point your attention to this one pod, we have chosen the first male of the human species to show you their abilities and to get you comfortable with the sight of these humans." The pod seemed to be open from the top, not the front, but the top. As several of the aliens went inside, You could actually hear the crowd gasp. What is going on? I could barely make out what they were saying, but somehow that thing they put in my head was translating all their words, and I could understand what they were saying. And they were suddenly shocked at what they saw. I looked down as far as I could, but I could barely see what was going on until I saw one of my fellow former soldiers climbing out the top, covered in blood. With that, several different of the security guard personnel came in. Different species came up and raised their weapons and began to fire on him, knocking him down to the ground. Some sort of pulse weapon was being used. I could hear him screaming in pain, and I looked as close as I could. I wondered what the hell was going on, but I really couldn't get a very good look at what was going on. I could just barely make out him writhing on the ground as he tried to get back on his feet. Eventually, they all tried to jump on him, but he was able to stand up, and I saw him actually grab one by the arm and chuck him like a goddamn rag doll a good 20 or 30 feet. And I heard something I didn't think I would. The man laughed. As the guards continued to pile on and subdue him, they must have jabbed him with something, because he eventually dropped down to one knee, and he started cursing, "You motherless bastards, you!" With that, you heard the announcer, "As you can see, the humans are very strong and very fast. The bidding for these will begin shortly, but we will put this one out on display. But do not concern yourself. We have adequate restraints to hold them down so that you may get a close-up view. However, we do recommend that you refrain from touching or caressing them, as they do find this to be difficult to handle. At least for now. If you were to take one of these for pleasure, I guarantee it would be worth your while to caress all you want." With this, another cold shudder went down my spine as I looked over, and I could see some four-eyed tentacle thing kind of staring right at me. Just out of instinct, I flipped her off. As I looked down, I could see the man being tied up, basically brought out, and he was almost quartered by the restraints holding his legs and arms out in all four directions. He was still out cold by whatever sedative they gave him. While this was happening, another pod was being brought down. "In this pod, you can see that there's a human female. This is an average human female, as you can see. They are usually not as aggressive as the males. However, you will see that she is still a bit dangerous, but again, a great asset for anyone who chooses to purchase one." The pod was again open from the top, and this time the two security personnel went in, and after a few seconds, the female came out with their bindings on. The bindings were holding her hands behind her back as they helped her out. As she walked forward, the announcer continued, "As you can see, the females are much more docile, which makes them better for the pleasure aspect. However, be rest assured, these are very strong creatures, as you can see by the definite muscle tone on this female." I began to clench my fists in rage at the idea of what the fuck these guys were gonna do. I hated myself for not being able to do anything. I pounded my fists against the glass ever so slightly, just trying to keep my rage under wraps as I could. But oh, it was boiling up in me, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on one of these scrawny bastards. As the female was brought up, her bindings was released. But as they tried to put the straps on her arm, she thrashed around, and this time she used her hand as a claw, reached up and dug it right into the neck of one of these skinny Xenos, some purple-skinned whatever in the hell it was. Her nails seemed to be sharp enough to dig right into its skin and slash it. The blood began to pour out, as you could hear, even at the distance I was, the Xeno scream in pain and fear as she started to fight back, but it didn't take more than 4 guards to restrain her and put her in the bindings. She was still screaming all sorts of profanity and screaming for help from any of us, but there was nothing we could do. Side by side, they were there. As the man began to gain consciousness, I wonder what type of curses came out of his mouth, but I'm sure he was far too groggy from whatever in the hell they had sedated him with. As you can see, we have our base male and female. No, there is not a third to choose from. However, you are free to genetically change them at your whim as soon as they are purchased. We do recommend that if you are going to use them for any type of gladiatorial arena, then we do recommend that you at least allow the males to have claws or fangs, as they do not come standard with either. I again worried about what I had just come into. I had to sit there and watch as the Xenos walked up to each of them and began to look around. And before I realized, I saw the machine pass right by me. I wasn't even looking for it, but it had gone to take more and more out as they displayed them. 5 on each side, 5 male, 5 female. But every time they pulled them down, each of them fought with even more veracity. They could see that if they didn't fight, they would simply be up for display. And the ones that were up for display were not dressed for very long. The security detail ended up tearing off all their clothes and fully exposing them. This caused many of the females to shriek as they did not want to be exposed. However, the security did not even slow down in their disrobing of anyone. This was going to be an interesting day. I had to sit there and watch this all happen for several hours, I guess. I couldn't even judge time anymore. I began to watch as each of the Xenos walked up past. Most of them stared. Many of them went to get a closer look and examined it closely with a discerning eye. A few laughed, many pointed, and a few even reached out and touched. In one case, this was a bad idea, as the male did not like the fact where that Xeno's tentacle had just wrapped around, and he was able to start breaking away from his bindings. I laughed a little bit as I could see the restraints straining to hold him as he started to pull his arms farther down towards the Xeno that had just done this. I couldn't tell if the Xeno was a man or woman. Definitely not this distance, but even up close I wouldn't be able to tell. But they all freaked out as they heard the metal restraints begin to strain under the pressure of this man desperately trying to get free. After several hours, we heard that same voice. Now that you have all had a good long look at our new arrivals, please take your seats as the bidding will commence soon. And with that, all the Xenos that had come close began to pull away and find seats. They all seemed to have some sort of light in their hand. As I would see, it was some sort of blue light and then a type of green. I didn't understand what it was, but apparently, if you were bidding on them, that particular one, you would hold up the blue light. If the bidding went too high, you would switch it over and flash the green light and then lower it. This was pretty obvious after the first 2 or 3 of us were auctioned off. I tried to hold my rage as best I could. For hours I had to sit there and watch my fellow humans be traded off like cattle. I knew we had fought a war, we had wasted so many lives to put an end to this barbaric practice, but apparently out here in the ether of space it was very, very common. As I saw the device come up to my pod, I sat down on the bed and held on to the side as the device pulled me out from there and my container lurched forward. It was oddly smooth. This was a well-practiced maneuver. Either that or was automated. And I was lowered down to the bidding area. As it landed, I saw that the device went away and then the top opened up. The security personnel stepped inside. This time they had learned, and now they had some sort of electric shocks with them. I guess they figured having the electricity kind of shock and make noises was going to be intimidating. I simply looked at it and I grinned. One of them must have understood what I was doing because he got mad and lurched at me. I didn't move. because I wanted to make sure I wasn't dreaming. He drove that thing right into my abdomen, but it tickled. I started laughing hysterically. Just, it was like 1,000 people had given me the old fashioned tickle torture from when I was a kid. It was crazy. I'm laughing. I'm laughing so hard I'm almost crying. And I could actually hear his buddy say, "That's enough. You're going to hurt him too much." I looked at him and I continued laughing. I could not realize how funny this situation had gone. They thought they had hurt me. The older one that had not shocked me simply looked at me and said, "Walk out calmly and we will not have to harm you again." I was too busy laughing to even consider moving. And then the younger one once again jabbed me with it, and again I started laughing as it still just tickled. I am wondering what the heck was going on. And finally he got pissed off. As I'm laughing so hard I had my eyes closed, he raised up the baton and hit me on the side of the head. I wasn't laughing after that. My head lurched to one side with the strike, and then I looked over at him. He had wound it up again for another strike, and I caught his hand on the way down. Grabbing the baton, I ripped it out of his head, and I swung it down to his legs, and I heard the bone crack as the baton made contact, and he doubled over in pain. And then I took the baton and jabbed it into his chest just for good measure, and he wailed in sheer pain. I only held it there for a few seconds, and then I pulled it off. And then I looked at the older one and tossed the baton aside. He was simply standing there in shock, not realizing what I had done. However, when it came to it, I simply walked out. I realized I need to fall back on my training. Don't fight your captors, or they might just kill you just for the hell of it. I simply walked out of that hatch. There was other security around me, all of them holding these strange tickle batons that they had, and I chuckled at the idea. Behind me, I could hear the older guard, after berating the one for whacking me with the baton, yelled up to his underlings, "Don't bother, that won't hurt him." I kind of chuckled again at this, but I looked over and I could see many different Xenos were looking at me, different species, many of them just disgusting to look at. Some of them with strange mandibles that seemed to reach out like a crab as they were talking. Others that had tendrils that came down over their face. Some of them slimy as all hell. Others that were reptilian. Like seriously, you'd think lizard men from those video game cinematics. It was crazy. You even had some that looked like the orcs from that whatever video game that is. You pay $10 a month to I don't know, sit there with your thumb in your butt. It was crazy. The differences I could see in there, it was just absolutely staggering. As I walked over, I could see the one with the microphone. "And on to our next human. As you can see, this one is very physically fit." As he was speaking, the older guard went and whispered in his ear, "Oh, and it is strong too. It was able to take down one of the guards and apparently was not able to be taken down by the shock batons." It looked over at the guard, kind of confused. "Are you sure?" The guard actually walked up to me, handed me the baton, turned it on, backed up, and gestured for me to use it. I saw the baton sparking. I spun it around and jabbed it into my side, and again I started laughing with all sorts of hysterics as it tickled so much it was driving me crazy. The laughter was actually what hurt. It made my sides hurt. I was laughing so hard. Then finally, I took the baton and tossed it away. They all looked over at the guard who had handed me the baton, and he gave his version of a shrug, I guess, which was kind of looked like a curtsy to me. "Well, that was a show. So it seems like we have a prize here, as the shock baton did not seem to injure this one, but he seems to be very, very willing to do what he's told, which means easy to control for you. So we will start the bidding now. I could hear the bidding going up in currencies I didn't understand. Eventually, it got to the point where people were actually betting small ships. I'm like, huh, I didn't know I was worth that much. And before we continue the bidding, we are going to show you what he looks like, fully. And that's when the guards ran up and started ripping at my clothes. I backhanded the first one as he grabbed my ass. And I waved my finger, no, 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 you don't do that. I decided, you know what, I'll show him a little bit, and I took off my shirt, but I held it in my hand. With that, the bidding continued. It wasn't long before I saw the bidding dwindling down, and eventually, the auctioneer, and you are now the proud owner of this human. Feel free to come and collect him as soon as he finishes his screening process. With that, I was left off to the side, and another pod was already being brought down. What I didn't realize until I had gotten to that point and turned around is that other pods had been being brought down. They weren't auctioning us off one at a time. No, there were several auction blocks stationed all around the place. It was just the one that I could see that I was brought to. In actuality, there was auction blocks in every direction. Must have been 3 or 4 dozen of them. Some of the humans went out. If they fought too much, they were immediately taken out. Eventually, I could see that they did have weapons strong enough to punch through. However, most of the weapons they used seemed to be energy-based, which, from what I could see from one of our guys as his body was being carted right past me, that it caused burns, 2nd and 3rd degree burns, but it didn't seem to be all the way through. The smell, however, the smell. All I could remember was bacon. Overcooked bacon. I knew that smell. Unfortunately, it's one of the reasons I have trouble eating bacon from my time over in a combat zone. I still had to remember my training. They need to like you. You need to learn all you can. You need to get into this. Eventually, they would send me through another set of scanners, and this time they actually held me in place as the scanner went over the body again, but this time I wasn't giving a dose of anything. They weren't trying to look for anything. Apparently, they wanted to make sure I didn't build any new viruses or bacteria in my system. Nope, just the normal ones I got. This time, as they carted me out, they asked me to hold out my hand. With that, my hands were bound, and before I knew it, a collar was put on me. I knew what this was going to be. This was a fucking shock collar. As soon as they let go of my hands, I reached up and put my hands next to my neck. And as I put my fingers in, it tried to shock me. I figured, you know what, I'll fake the funk, and I flinched. I flinched a bit, and then I could hear them say, turn it up, I want to see him jump around. Unfortunately, I did have to fake the funk, and I did fall on the ground and jump a little bit, pretending that this shock collar actually hurt. Apparently, these guys don't understand that you need a pretty high amount of voltage. But then again, as skinny as all these folks are, maybe it just doesn't take much. Eventually, I was led down a hallway, and then another one, and then another one. And then I was swapped off to another set of guards and left in a holding area. And then another human came in, and then 3 or 4 more. And then finally, when the last one was brought in, the door behind her shut. Rather abruptly, too. Scared the crap out of her, almost literally. We looked at each other, and I didn't say anything, but I just listened. The only thing I would ever say was, "Are you okay?" And just get a nod back. Eventually, the door on the other side opened, and we were told to walk towards the area. Eventually, we were all brought into another corridor and another corridor. I was starting to wonder if we were just being brought around in circles until eventually we were brought into an open area. But it was pretty obvious what this was. We looked around. There were crates on either side of us. There was a giant door similar to the ones we just walked through on the other side of the room. We could tell that the shape was slightly rectangular, And the gravity was very, very different. It didn't take long for me to realize we were on another ship. And with that, the door shut, and they brought something for us to eat and drink. I remember handing over my shirt to one of the females that was there. Apparently, whoever had bought us decided to split male and female. I was a little hesitant to ask, what did they have planned? But I did give her my shirt, as her clothing had been torn, and she was slightly exposed. So for her sake of modesty, of course, I gave it to her. And then one of the guys who decided, you know what? This other female here, she's not even wearing pants. He can walk around in his underwear, but I'm pretty sure she should be wearing some pants. Didn't fit her very well, but at least she got them on. As we could feel the change in gravity, we began to feel that the ship was moving. The inertia system that was here was very different than the ship we were just on, as we could feel the ship move, and eventually as it pushed away from the moorings and then activated its engines, we were thrown against the side of the room, right into some crates. Thankfully, we weren't too much worse for wear at that point, although all of us were very hungry. As we were on our way, we finally got a good look at who, or should I say what, had just purchased us.